At 14 years old, I witnessed my mother's murder. One day, it was a very eerie feeling. We were being watched. We pulled onto the driveway and this vehicle pulled up behind us. The last thing I ever remember her saying to me is, "Oh my God, he's here." My parents got divorced when I was 2. It was mostly just my mum and I. We had a strong relationship. Everywhere she was, I was 10 paces behind her. Well, actually normally in front of her with my energy levels, but we were pretty inseparable. I was 7 when my mum met my stepdad. We went down to his farm and I got on with him really well straight away. I loved the farm. He was so willing to take me round and give me attention, and same with my mum. He was constantly, sort of doing whatever he could for us and love bombing us, really. Soon enough, a lot of it became just for public view. He had a lot of mood swings. The first real physical thing that I particularly saw, he'd been out drinking and he'd gone shooting. He'd come home that night and he was very drunk and he was not in a good mood. He decided to start an argument with my mum when she was in bed. I'd heard a bang from my room and it turns out that he'd wrenched the TV out of the wall and he'd smashed it on the floor so hard that it had ripped through the carpet. He then went downstairs and went into his gun cabinet, stomped up the stairs in a very menacing way. He'd accused her of having an affair because she'd been out to see her friend. He then announced that he was divorcing her and then he left, he drove off. I've never seen her so scared. She was violently shaking. She was convinced that he was going to kill her at that point. We left that night and we went to my grandparents' house with just whatever we could gather at that time. One day, my mum, when she got home from work, she said that she was going out that night. I was going to sit at my mum's friend's house with her daughters and we were going to spend the night together while my mum and her friend went out for the evening. I never thought this would be the last night I'd spend with my mum. Halfway through the evening, I got a text message from my mum saying, "I think he's tracked the car." A couple of weeks previous, he had taken my mum's car from my nan and granddad's drive using the spare key that had been left at his house. It became apparent that at that point, that was when he had fitted a tracker to the vehicle. He turned up to the pub that she was at. He confronted her. They had a conversation outside, nothing heated, and he left. And he was actually strangely calm. My mum went inside, finished her drink and took her time, came and picked me up. It was a very eerie feeling being in the vehicle, knowing that there was a tracker on it. It was hard not knowing where it was, but knowing we were being watched. We pulled onto the driveway. Within 20 seconds of being on the drive, this vehicle pulled up behind us. I was on my phone, faffing around, getting out of the car. And my mum had looked into the rearview mirror and she'd seen his truck pull up and block us into the driveway. The last thing I ever remember her saying to me is, "Oh my God, he's here." I've picked up my phone, trying to get onto the police. My thumbprint ID wasn't working. At this point, he's banging on the driver's side window with an object, attempting to either scare her or break the glass. I ran round to him, and just before I was able to get a hold of him and move him, he shot through the glass, and then he shot her again. I just froze for a second. He sort of looked at me, turned on his heel, and started to walk away. I chased after him. I jumped on him. I just kept saying to him, "Why?" Jumped into his vehicle. I stood in front of his Land Rover. I banged on the bonnet and I was like, "You need to tell me why." And then I heard the engine start up. I'm lucky I moved when I did because he only just missed me. I stood there and I went, "Right, don't panic. What do you need to do right now?" I knew that you don't get shot from that distance and survive. But my first thing was check for a pulse. I couldn't pick anything up and the next door neighbour had come out. We called the police immediately. I knew I wasn't going to let him get away with this. He went back home to his farm. He decided he'd committed this crime and he was going to take the coward's way out. He did shoot himself with the same shotgun, but he missed and ended up blowing his face off. It was just a typical thing that, of course, he would survive, shooting himself in the face. In the same breath, I am glad he's alive because he now gets to sit and think about what he did every single day. It took a long time to get an interview with him due to his injuries, 10 months after the murder. In that interview, he did admit to killing my mum. It was a strange feeling because as much as he had admitted what he had done, I knew full well that wasn't going to be the end of it. In 2019, we got him to Birmingham Crown for a trial. I was the first witness in the case and I chose to be. I was offered screens so that I wouldn't have to see him. I chose, at the age of 15, to go into the courtroom, open court, as any other person would. It was incredibly intimidating, as the first time I had seen him since he shot my mum. He looked scary. It was not pleasant. But it was important for me to go in and to stand in that box and give my evidence and know that he hadn't broke me, he hadn't broken our family, and he was going to pay for what he'd done. He got sentenced on the same day as he was found guilty. He got 31 years minimum before eligible for parole. I never thought I'd see him be put away for that long. It was utter relief. My mum was the 9th domestic homicide of the year, and that was only in January. I knew that I couldn't just sit back and let the same thing happen to women all over the country when I had an opportunity to share my story and change the system. I wanted to get involved in some sort of campaigning and getting my story out there. It really started with conferences and with charity work. I've done television interviews, documentary, I do talks all up and down the country. Even if it doesn't dramatically change someone's life, it might just get the cogs whirring to what's going on in their own life or their neighbour's life. I really want to be making my mum proud and keeping her legacy going on.